Hello, my dear friends. How are you? I'm Ari Thurger, and today I'm going to talk about a left-hand path approach in modern witchcraft. Please don't take this video as a scientific work or an academic work because it isn't. This is a belief and not objective reality. This is a perception and not provable facts. Much of what I shall say throughout this video can be experienced, but without a doubt, each person experiences things quite differently, and not everything that works for one person will work for another. So take this as indeed one direction. Well, not the band, obviously, good gods. Take this as a perception in a vast field of multiple realities where there are many ways of perception as there are eyes to see. This is a path you can take from time to time in the long process of personal development throughout your life and seeking to immerse yourself in a world of magic and mystery, which by itself is a collection of organisms, and each individual is capable of expanding its mind and consciousness flows in a multiplicity of choices. When it comes to the left hand path, many would think it is a selfish path, self serving, even narcissistic, or better still, egocentric. In many aspects, indeed, it is self serving, as the point is personal evolution, striving to become a better version than our past selves. And one is always at risk of falling into a narcissistic path, whatever that path might be, when we use spirituality as a glorifying token to enhance and magnify our ego. The aim of a left hand path, not all of them, of course, but a great majority, the aim is to build our own path and be open to self evolution. The aim is always reaching enlightenment. Selfishness depends on personal greed and how we choose to apply the knowledge we have. Selfishness may happen in whatever path we choose. In the process of self development and self growth, we can choose to share our experiences and perspectives with others. And as such, it doesn't become a selfish path. Sharing and exchanging knowledge, but not preaching or forcing others to believe in what we believe, because that would be indeed quite selfish. It depends very much on the person and what morals and principles that person already possessed before choosing any spiritual path. Spirituality may change a person in many ways, positively or negatively, but if the person doesn't first change from within, then every path is as dark as any. Many would think that a right hand path is the best approach. And of course, obviously, each person chooses what best suits them in order to grow spiritually. But there is often the mistake to think that a right hand path isn't selfish and that it serves the community, while a left hand path serves only the individual and the community is left behind, which isn't true. It very much depends on what we are seeking to accomplish. Both right hand paths and left hand paths seek to reach enlightenment, and both can be selfish or not, depending very much on what we choose to do with the knowledge we have obtained and the values and principles we had before. For instance, there's often the idea that a right hand path isn't selfish and that it serves the community, which isn't always true. The primary objective of many right hand paths is to reach godhood, or seek to be in a place higher than any mortal man or woman, to seek nirvana, seek paradise, saving one's soul, afterlife, eternal reward for the individual. And in that way, such right hand paths become selfish when the individual feeds the ego and strives to reach a state that completely abandons the reality of the living and the world itself, and therefore does not truly serve the community at all, but serves himself or herself for the sole purpose of having personal reward. In a left hand path, This could also happen, of course, and perhaps it becomes even more difficult because indeed the sole purpose is personal development. So we do spend too much time with our own selves and trying to better ourselves. And this can indeed lead into a spirituality that feeds the ego, or at the very least, it might become easier to see spirituality as a self aggrandizing tool. But as I said, it depends very much on what we do with the knowledge we have acquired and the values and principles we had before choosing a spirituality. A left hand path, even being an approach and perception towards life and the spiritual very much individualistic and solitary, doesn't necessarily has to be purely self-serving. We can share our experiences and knowledge with others. Spirituality isn't only about the community or only about the individual, but it can be both if we strive to create a symbiotic relationship with our surroundings. And whatever path we choose, it can even lead to that same symbiotic relationship. And that perhaps may have been the objective all along. Sometimes we need the community, and sometimes the community needs us. The individual has a part to play in the community. So sometimes we need to take a step back or be apart from all the rest. We may need a pause. We may need to shut away ourselves from the rest of the world in order to seek our true potential, our own magic, our own power, or because a specific call was intended for us and us alone. And we follow the call, we follow the desire, the knowledge, the magic, and the mystery which only makes sense to us. And after knowing ourselves, gathering information, acquiring knowledge, we can return and share it with the community, or even put to practice our knowledge for the benefit of the whole. Sometimes it's necessary to move away and seek our own path in order to return and serve the community. Serving the community by serving ourselves, and serving ourselves by serving the community, serving others. Wouldn't that be the whole purpose of a shaman, a spiritual leader? Doesn't the shaman experiences things only knowable to the shaman's own self and goes through self-sacrifice in order to serve its community? But I'm not here today to talk about shamanism. I'm here to talk about witchcraft, because witchcraft, more often than not, it's quite solitary, but it is possible to help whatever community we choose to help with our own personal experiences and by sharing knowledge with others. Witchcraft is not something that we can put in a bag and give some specific label. Witchcraft has had numerous definitions, redefinitions, constructions, and reconstructions over time in the course of human history. In fact, in traditional witchcraft, it is possible to find several characteristics in common with different religions, but also a lot of differences, different ideas and practices, and from person to person, a lot can change, obviously. Traditional witchcraft is not static, it is not a perception of the world that tends to become stagnant, but a series of practical activities that leads the person to be more active and involved in the world all around. Witchcraft is highly pragmatic and an animistic approach without beginning or end, because it is always evolving and developing the more we learn and interact with the world around us. Always evolving and reshaping itself the same way we reshape our own consciousness as we learn from our attitudes and practical displays of belief, faith, or cult. Witchcraft is an umbrella term which can be applied to many cultic practices as well as activities that aim to directly interact with the supernatural. Witchcraft can then be perhaps defined as a practical folk magic influenced by an animistic worldview. Witchcraft is a practical way that helps to maintain a direct contact with the animistic perception that we have of the world. And in this aspect, any individual can practice witchcraft, as it does not obey to any specific religion, creed, or faith, since it is a constant interaction with a worldview in which there is no clear division between the physical world and the supernatural world or the spiritual. For this very reason, contrary to what one might think, witchcraft is not a pagan system, let alone a religion. Nobody considered themselves a wizard or a witch or even considered themselves a practitioner of witchcraft until this concept appeared in the Middle Ages as a definition that separates the religious from the traditional folk magic, separating magic from the faith structured by religious canons. People in their natural state and in their interaction with the natural world already had these practices, these surviving magical activities in traditional folk magic. Nobody was really a wizard or a witch practicing witchcraft, but in fact, purely and simply carrying out countless activities to be in contact with the world around all of us, where the magical and the religious do not have a concrete separation or boundary, even, where the supernatural and all the supernatural entities or persons of the world are as much inserted in the world as we are. Although many witchcraft traditions have their foundational myths pointing to bygone ages somewhere in the hazy mists of the past where time and memory blend, the type of witchcraft that we are more used to, more familiar with nowadays, is actually usually a modern system that draws on some folk sources, whose appearance is precisely in a period close to that of the appearance of the left-hand path. In modern times, both in the resurgence and construction of modern witchcraft and the left-hand path approach to spirituality, there was discontentment and frustration with the paradigms and dogmas and canons of society, where the only approach to the spiritual was through a religious authority that dictates what is right and wrong. And that in truth, this same religious authority serves as the vehicle that communicates to the believers and followers the will of the divine. And in fact, the will of the divine is only religious laws written by those who have created their own religion, not giving the people a chance to have a direct and more personal contact with the divine and the supernatural in general. Hence, through this discontent and this spiritual emptiness and hunger to have a deeper and personalized contact with the supernatural, left-hand paths are born and witchcraft is reborn in a more modernized state, of course, but trying little by little, step by step, to return to traditional folk magic activities. Both left-hand path and modern witchcraft often share an interest in the night mysteries or nocturnal mysteries, and the idea of an archetypal female initiator that takes us on an inner journey and opens our access to the realities parallel to ours and often thought to be beyond the physical or even the material, but such realities are understood both in witchcraft, modern witchcraft, and in many left-hand paths as being right here, all around, attainable, reachable, if we care to interact with it through initiation into these mysteries and carrying out pragmatic involvement. One does not have to die and wait for eternal reward elsewhere when what we deem to be supernatural and even divine is already here with us and within us. And in that way, there's no real divine or supernatural, but just entities, persons of the world with whom we share space. Therefore, initiation into the night mysteries or nocturnal mysteries is a small step that is present in both Left Hand Path and modern witchcraft. These mysteries consist of the recognition of what in the world gives us subliminal information that in turn will constitute our subconscious. Not only the observation of what surrounds us, but to see beyond what we consider normal to exist because it is immediately perceptible by our eyes and other common senses. Observe, see, and understand a meaning, understand the primeval, focus on the instinctive, and formulate a meaning from what is felt without the use of common senses. Understand the relationships that we all have, but we cannot immediately explain because seemingly nothing observable is interacting with us, but such information and interaction will ultimately be reflected and even originate in the subconscious. It is the exercise of manifesting a meaning without going through an analytical analysis. In other words, instead of rejecting this apparently dormant and dark side we have within our own conscious, we embrace it and make this side of us dialogue with our consciousness, thus transporting the subconscious to the conscious, and thus intuition begins to emerge and be connected through instinct. This is the initiation into the night mysteries or the nocturnal mysteries, the internalization of our aspects repressed by preconceived ideas of what constitutes the real. The immediately perceptible reality is not the only reality that exists, but the most familiar and most comfortable to us. Both the left hand path and in modern witchcraft, well, it places the practitioner in a position of having the sole authority over its own surroundings. Since in these understandings, there is neither recognition nor acceptance of an authority other than oneself. There is no external authority that dictates what should be done or how it should be done. So, without specific canons, without law, without regulations, without external support that might help us or even guide us, alone we find values in very primal and intuitive aspects because there is no other way. Being alone, who are we going to turn to if not ourselves? The internalization of ourselves and discovering all the voices that speak with and within us and the stories they have to tell. And from that moment on, we gain our own experiences and form a path only recognized by ourselves, thus being something very personal. We find power in ourselves through knowledge about the natural laws of the world that are above everything and above magic itself, which allows us to bend and direct its flows in our favor. Of course, there is a variety of differences and different aspects between the left hand path and witchcraft, be that modern or traditional. While left hand path focuses on a process of individuation and self-improvement that leads to a or might lead to a state of enlightenment, and sometimes the idea is also to reach a state of divinity, witchcraft is only concerned with the here and now. Certainly there is also a personal development in witchcraft, but it does not necessarily have to be the sole focus, nor does it necessarily have to be a process in search of deification, or indeed it isn't specifically required an initiation into the night mysteries. While witchcraft seeks in a certain way to deflect from the social norm and in a way returning to the earth itself, to the telluric, meaning interaction with the forces existing in the world, the left hand path seeks an alternative path to enlightenment, a path of individuation or even divinization, if that's even a word. However, in witchcraft, it is possible to incorporate a left-hand path approach within the animistic perception, since witchcraft is often solitary and is the interaction of the individual with the world, seeking to obtain a symbiotic relationship with the tangible world and the realities beyond the tangible world. In this regard, the individual often needs to seek knowledge within itself, relying on its interior self and the information existing in the subconscious. Information that is the reflection of conscious interactions of everyday life activities through practical witchcraft. For instance, knowledge of the virtues of a particular plant may not come solely by the practical use of the plant, but also by the subtle pieces of information that are not immediately perceived during the practice, but such information lies within one's own subconscious. And through the interaction with our own subconscious, we perceive meaning that wasn't possible to perceive before while doing practice in the waking world. The same way the spiritual leader of the tribal community, let's say a shaman, a general term, will communicate with the plant before taking it away, letting the spirit of the plant know why it is being taken away, for which purpose, and the spirit of the plant will be aware of the intention. It has been communicated to it, and as such, the spirit will help and act according to the intention required, through a bargain between the shaman, the spiritual leader, and the spirit of this plant. This is an animistic perception, which is very much part of traditional witchcraft, or better still, traditional folk magic. Interactions of all sorts to acquire all sorts of information, and the information bears meaning, but many meanings can only surface when the subconscious takes hold. I think it is precisely the animistic understanding that stands out as the main difference between witchcraft and left-hand path or left-hand paths. Witchcraft is also a very animistic path, as I said before, where the spirit of each element around us and within the world is recognized and deeply part of the craft. While in left-hand path, a variety of paradigms in relation to entities is accepted, whether from a purely psychological or spiritualist point of view. Working with natural elements such as plants or trees, but also stones, even animals and such, is also much more common in witchcraft than in any left-hand path, of course, obviously. So, of course, this doesn't mean that witchcraft is in its totality a left-hand path manifestation or something of the sort, because it isn't, not at all. But both approaches are at, let's say, a crossroads, so to speak. There are similar ideas, there are even certain activities and interactions and interpretations that both have in common or may incorporate certain attitudes in one another, and even practices, but at the same time choose different paths, which can then cross again at some point in life. I think the important thing to understand in here is that there are similarities and there are differences, but information, attitudes, knowledge, activities, perceptions, and understandings can be crossed. Nobody necessarily has to strictly follow a single path for the rest of their lives. Because in fact, if that is the attitude, then a multitude of paths are ignored that could have been quite useful, not only in personal development, personal growth, but also in a better understanding of the magic and the mystery that surrounds us. After all, the human mind changes all the time. It evolves with the amount of new information that it receives, creating new perceptions. So it's never static. The same way witchcraft itself is also always evolving, always changing, adapting to each new reality, the more it interacts with the world. And the world by itself is also ever evolving. So, a left hand path approach to witchcraft is as useful as a pragmatic animistic perception of traditional folk magic in a left hand path. One path can give us a lot of knowledge, obviously, certainly, but it is not enough. And to ignore all other possible paths is to deny a large amount of knowledge that can be useful for both the individual and the community that individual might serve, if the individual uses that knowledge to help the community to grow, thrive, and move towards a better state than the previous one. Thus, using information that helped in the personal growth and the development of an individual to apply that same personal growth to the community itself. Not necessarily becoming a spiritual leader or a religious authority or even a divinity, but simply sharing knowledge, sharing information, and above all, sharing experience, so that each individual within the community can stand out and evolve by themselves, strengthening the community from within. Right, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I know the scenery in here is a little bit dark. It was not on purpose, but it's raining quite a lot and some of the lights were gone. It happens in old houses. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video. I hope you have enjoyed this. I hope it was useful. And as always, tack för idag. Thanks for today.